Tom Kozlik, the head of public policy and municipal strategy at Hilltop Securities. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's episode of our Hilltop Talks Politics and Finance podcast series for 2025. During these Hilltop Talks podcast discussions, we speak with subject matter experts about topics that intersect the worlds of politics and finance at the federal, state, and local levels in the United States. We often concentrate on issues related to U.S. public finance and the U.S. municipal bond market. And today's guest is going to help us dissect and discuss the state of U.S. infrastructure, and specifically the American Society of Civil Engineers 2025 U.S. Infrastructure Report Card. So I want to welcome Terry Smith to the podcast. Thanks for joining us, Terry.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks, Hilltop, for having me aboard today. I wanted to just make sure up front that it's clear that while I'm a part of the American Society of Civil Engineers and the Committee for America's Infrastructure that does America's ASCE National Report Card, that today, when I'm talking, these are going to be my own views and my own opinions.
Okay, thank you, Terry. And also, I wanted to share a little more detail about Terry, what it is that he's doing with the ASCE, and also talk about his background before we get into the Q&A. Terry Smith is the Energy Sector Lead for the American Society of Civil Engineers Committee on America's Infrastructure 2025 National Report Card. In March of 2023, Terry was appointed to the President's National Infrastructure Advisory Council Electronification Subcommittee. And in March of 24, he was reappointed to the National Infrastructure Advisory Council to serve on the Disaster Response and Resiliency Subcommittee. Terry is also the chairman and CEO of Smith's Research and Gradings, which he founded in 1992. And for more than 3 decades, Smith's Research and Gradings has produced award-winning research and predictive analytics to finance critical infrastructure assets. Terry is also the chairman and CEO of Smith Information Services, which provides restructuring and disaster recovery for critical infrastructure assets of sovereign, sub-sovereign, and non-governmental organizations. So again, Terry, thank you for joining us today.
Tom, it's a real privilege to be here. I mean, it's great to be with one of the all-stars, the #1 generalist in the country, as elected by the institutional investors. Respect the work that you do there at Hilltop and the contribution you're making to the investment process in America's infrastructure. Just as a place setter about how I ended up here, I think the big thing is that I'm part of the American Society of Civil Engineers, which was started in 1852. And it's the largest civil engineering organization like in the world. It has more than 165,000 civil engineers, and they are advancing science and professionalism for civil engineering and protecting public health, safety, and welfare. Big thing here is that they have 75 domestic and 17 international sections. So we have global reach. And in a nutshell, the ASCE writes all the standards for civil engineering, and that translates into the everyday local building codes for infrastructure.
So Terry, what's your specific connection to the ASCE? You said you're an ASCE member, did you not? What else? What's your specific connection to the American Society of Civil Engineers?
Like so many things, Tom, there's a personal connection that I made with a person called Maria Lehman. She's one of the most powerful and successful women in the world. And it's been a privilege to work with her. She's an incredibly impressive woman. And she was executive director of the New York State Thruway Authority, where she designed, built, and financed the Governor Mario Cuomo, also known as the New Tappan Zee Bridge. She designed, built, and financed the new Goethals Bridge to Staten Island using availability payments. And she is going to be inducted to the National Academy of Engineering in October. And that's the highest award any engineer could ever be given. So she appointed me, and she appointed me to this America's Infrastructure Report Card because of the work that we've done at Smith's Research and Gradings to independently assess the credit quality of America's infrastructure for more than 3 decades. Smith's Research and Grading has earned the trust of Wall Street, Main Street, and the ASCE membership.
So I know that the American Society of Civil Engineers infrastructure report card has existed since 1998. It's something that I followed going back to when I was in a combination of graduate school and when I first got into the public finance business. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the report card. Let's not get into the specifics for the report card results yet, but I was wondering if you could kind of set the stage for the results and talk a little bit about the report card from a big picture and a little bit of its history.
Sure, Tom. Like you said, it started in 1998, and it's really a quadrennial assessment of America's infrastructure. That's every 4 years. We come out with a report card for America's infrastructure, but we work throughout those 4 years because it's a comprehensive look at all of America's infrastructure. And for more than 2 decades, the message behind that unflattering grade was consistently the state, federal, and local governments and the private sector have not been prioritizing the funding of America's infrastructure. In sum, the bill on our infrastructure systems is past due. We need to reverse the nation's growing infrastructure investment gap to remain competitive in the global marketplace, and allow local businesses to thrive and keep our families safe.
So, what is infrastructure according to the ASCE?
America's infrastructure is the foundation of our national economy, global competitiveness, and quality of life. While it's often taken for granted, when it isn't working properly, every American household or business immediately feels the impact of just one inefficiency or failure in our built environment. I challenge you to go 1 minute any day without somehow using or benefiting from infrastructure. Our infrastructure includes an interconnected system of highways, streets, public buildings, the electric grid, mass transit, ports, airports, inland waterways, water systems, the electric grid. And for the first time, we've included broadband, which is the internet. And we found that, in our surveys that 87% of Americans believe the internet is part of America, a critical part of America's infrastructure now. So we're looking at that, dams, levees, and other public and private facilities. Maintaining these networks. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Terry. Please finish.
It's just maintaining those networks is essential to meet the economic demands to protect public health and safety so that, American families and businesses thrive. And we need that first-class infrastructure system that moves people and goods safely, sustainably, efficiently, and affordably by land, water, and air. And that energy system transmission that can deliver clean, dependable, low-cost power, and water systems that are reliable and safely drive the industrial process as well as daily functions of our communities. That's infrastructure.
So what was this year's grade, and what are the important elements of it?
The 2025 report card for America's infrastructure provides a snapshot of how our infrastructure system is faring and offers solutions for improving the performance of each category. For the second consecutive report, the report card has been upgraded, this time to C, which is, albeit mediocre, but shows that the U.S. infrastructure is trending in the right direction, thanks to a comprehensive support, innovative solutions, and bold bipartisan leadership. Continued action is needed to improve these networks, unlocking the full potential of our national economy and creating opportunities for all Americans.
So in reading the report itself, one of my takeaways was that one of the reasons of why it is that the grade improved this year, there were kind of two big picture elements to that. Number one, because of federal fiscal policy, a combination of the 2021 infrastructure and other related federal fiscal policy that was focused on a combination of state and local governments and infrastructure specifically. That was kind of the first element. The second is that there's been about an average of 450 billion of bond issuance annually going back to 2019, which is pretty significantly above the levels that we saw the entire decade before. So it seems like there are two elements that really helped the infrastructure improvement that the ASCE report card is kind of reporting. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about those elements and if that is kind of momentum that's going to continue into 2026 and beyond.
Tom, I think you've hit on something there because the incremental improvements that were made across some of the historically low graded categories in the report card, almost half of the 18 assessed categories saw increased grades,
Mhm.
which contributed to that overall improvement you're talking about. But it's going in the right direction. It's still a mediocre grade. And those infrastructure improvements are still necessary. And tax exempt bonds have played an increasingly big role in improving America's infrastructure. I think one of the lessons we've learned here is that just we have the funding. Sometimes it's like a once in a lifetime increase in funding at the federal level we've just experienced. But municipal bonds have been the mainstay for funding and financing America's infrastructure, Tom.
One of the things that I would personally argue, and I have written about, as you know, Terry, is that the golden age of public finance, you knew that we couldn't get through this podcast without me talking about this. The golden age of public finance that started in 2021, although it's over, I think that that's one of the reasons of why it is that bond issuance was not just healthy recently, but we saw record levels of municipal bond issuance last year. Do you think that if there are changes to the municipal bond tax exemption as a result of 2025 tax policy this year? Do you think that we see, maybe not necessarily just in 2025, but years after 2025, in 26, 27, do you think that municipal bond issuance could be as healthy?
There's a couple pieces here you've raised, Tom. That's a big question you just asked. And to answer that, I think I'd first of all like to quantify sort of what is the need. And that would be, we're estimating 3.7 trillion is the infrastructure gap that still needs to be financed and funded. And that future needs are critical to remaining competitive. And we need every tool in our toolbox to meet those needs, including the tax-exempt municipal bonds. I think that's the key message that we're talking about, is that while there was outsized or increased growth in issuance, Tom, I'm going to ask you, do you think it was enough? And I'm saying the ASCE has found that it's not. We're still shortfall. We're still falling short of what's needed to keep America's infrastructure strong.
One of the things, even as I'm remembering reading the infrastructure report card, I'm remembering that one of the things that was highlighted is the fact that that $3.7 trillion infrastructure funding gap would be higher, if not considerably higher, if it wasn't for that extra federal fiscal policy, in addition to the significant amount of municipal bond issuance that we've seen in the last couple of years, right? So it sounds like basically what you're saying, and the conclusion that I'm drawing is that without the municipal bond tax exemption, that $3.7 trillion infrastructure gap is going to rise.
That's the worst case kind of scenario we're looking at if we cannot maintain the funding and financing, Tom. And that's a twofold part. Then I think we'll have a shortfall that's going to be ongoing. And of course, the advances that we have made could just as easily, fall behind. Right now in our report, as strong as it is in terms of the overall infrastructure, it also reveals that there's 4,000 bridges right now in the nation that are failing. So this is something that we look at. We know that America's roads, while we had a tremendous IIJA, Infrastructure and Jobs Act, investment in surface transportation, and the grade went up, the fact is that 112 people, roughly, approximately every day, die on the roads due to the failure to maintain them. So that's almost, if you think about it, like a plane crash every day. But because it's individuals, we don't see the real costs. If it happened at an airport, everybody would be shut down, would be focused on that need in the critical infrastructure. So, Tom, it's an insidious sort of battle that we're fighting here to maintain. And the costs are absolutely catastrophic when you look at it as a collective.
So what is it going to take for infrastructure to garner more public attention?
Tom, I think what Hilltop's doing with this podcast is a good start and an example. Working with people to highlight the value of municipal bonds because these are great investments in America. Like you did when you spoke at the American Society of Civil Engineers fly-in, when we were going to be preparing to go up on Capitol Hill to defend tax exemption. We had 300 civil engineers we flew in from all across the country and covered all 50 states. We went with 80% of the senators' offices and 80% of the Congress to talk about the importance of tax exemption for funding America's infrastructure, Tom. And what you did was key to making that happen. Thank you.
I'm happy to do that, and you know that I will continue to do that for sure. One of the things that I think where the municipal bond tax exemption is concerned generally, and the threat to the municipal bond tax exemption is specifically, is that oftentimes there's not a connection that's made amongst lawmakers in DC about what municipal bonds are used for. There are some folks in DC who absolutely understand, but I think that oftentimes one of the reasons of why it's important that organizations like the American Society of Civil Engineers and the GFOA's Public Finance Network and other organizations, why it's important that they continue to educate and advocate in Washington, is because folks in Washington need to be reminded about what you were talking about in the introduction, about the fact that it's really hard for folks to go throughout their day and not be attached to something infrastructure related, whether it be bridges, dams, water, roads, parks, trains, schools, and the financing for that and the financing tool in the municipal bond tool. It's very, very important, and folks need to be reminded about that.
I think ASCE believes that infrastructure investment strengthens our country's economic competitiveness and improves the quality of life and saves American families money. I think infrastructure investment comes from all levels of government as well as the private sector, and each of those partners in the infrastructure space provide its fair share. The decision makers can leverage that available funding and financing options, such as tax-exempt muni bonds. And I think that for decades, muni bonds have played a vital role in financing that infrastructure project across the country, and are now the primary means for financing that infrastructure. The tax-exempt municipal bonds should be fully maintained as a critical tool for the states, and it remains under attack, Tom, to be clear. I've heard some people talking about how the threat to tax exemption is past. And I would say, Tom, not only if we somehow do manage to get through this big, beautiful bill without tax exemption being threatened, I think, Tom, we got to look at it's been on the table now and on the menu. And I think the threat will happen again next year. So we have to, Tom, to be thinking about how do we keep this visibility heightened throughout, the federal government, but also how do we mobilize more people at the local level so they can appreciate, the value of that tax exemption in their everyday lives and in their investment portfolios, Tom, to be clear. I think these are fantastic investments right now. It's a great investment opportunity for people to invest in America, especially, Tom, if we have, I don't know, you seem to think that, I guess, Hilltop says that there may be potentially a recession coming in the future and that they will cut rates at some point. And if the Fed does that, these muni bonds are a beautiful investment right now. I mean, they're just the best investments in America because they don't have any risk from, the tariffs. This doesn't have supply chain risks. It's all here in America. So it's kind of a beautiful thing. The golden age, Tom, may not be over for muni bonds. We may actually have another golden age dawning. Not sure yet.
Well, what I would add to what is it you're saying, especially about the threat to the municipal bond tax exemption, just because I think that there's a lot of nuance there, and it's important to, I think, to reiterate what you just said, in that the threat has not passed. And even though about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, even though I wrote a piece saying that the threat is lower than what it has been leading up to kind of the beginning of May of 2025, I think there's two elements of that to keep in mind. The first is that the reason of why it is that the threat is lower right now for state and local government bonds is just because the threat to the amount of pay-fors that lawmakers have agreed to come up with as of right now is lower than what it was likely going to be. meaning what we thought they were going to be going after as pay fors was going to amount in the number, going to be range from like $4 to $6 trillion. Now, as of right now, and this could change, the pay fors that they're tasked to come up with are likely to amount between $1.5 trillion to 2, which is still a lot. But if that number rises, then the threat to the tax exemption, especially for state and local government bonds, rises. But I still think that there's at least a 50% or greater chance that something happens to either private activity bonds generally or certain sectors in the private activity bond world specifically. And then one of the other things, and this, I'm kind of reiterating one of the other things that you said, even if elements of the municipal bond tax exemption survive in 2025, if anything, the impact, especially with regard to the US deficit, could increase the threat to the municipal bond tax exemption in 26 or 27, because I think that there very well could be, or there is likely going to be, a bipartisan commission similar to the Bowles-Simpson Commission from 2010 that is going to be looking for ways to cut the deficit, because it's likely that 2025 tax policy is going to maybe even add substantially to the deficit, right? So I'm on board with you, and I think that organizations like the ASCE, the GFOA Public Finance Network, SIFMA, the BDA, ASA, they've been doing great work educating, advocating, talking about the municipal bond financing tool in DC. And I think that effort is going to have to increase, not fall away in not just coming months, but in the next few years. Is that what you're thinking as well?
I think so, Tom. And
Yeah.
I think that right there in Texas, it's interesting that Hilltop. I mean, I was on the energy lead for the American Society for Civil Engineers, and we did the Texas State Report Card, and we had only two sectors in the infrastructure report card were downgraded. One of which was energy, which was downgraded from C- to D+. That was the biggest downgrade. In Texas, the need really outsized because there's this nexus between energy and water in our infrastructure. So water requires a lot of energy and vice versa. For example, in West Texas, for every 1 barrel of oil pumped out of the ground, there are, say, 5 to 10 barrels of water that need to get pumped out. We currently are pumping about 3 million barrels of oil. And those pumps are electric, by the way, because everyone, of course, is sensitive about emissions. So under the plan to drill, baby, drill, the production is expected to increase in Texas to about 5 million barrels a day, which will produce about 25 to 50 million barrels of water, which must be transported from the wellheads and pumped back into the ground. And we know the Texas ERCOT grid will be severely challenged to deliver that increased electricity need to meet that demand. So, I mean, that really hits home. I mean, the two Texas categories that improved were aviation and roads in 2025. 4 Texas categories remain unchanged: bridges, dams, public parks, and water. And 6 categories declined: drinking water, energy, levees, solid waste, transit, and wastewater. So these are, I mean, this is going, I'm giving you a little extra behind the scenes look at what that infrastructure report card does on a national level and trying to reveal sort of what at the state report card level it means for Texas. And I think last year, the last Texas legislative session, 2023, had a voter referendum which passed and established a one-time $1 billion state water fund. And this session, Senate Bill 7 looks likely to be approved, which will add $1 billion a year to the Texas Water Development Board, specifically for new water sources, clean processed water, and drinking water. So the current need, as far as my engineers are telling me, right now is about 50 billion. What that means from an investment standpoint is that currently the energy and water systems need improvements to that level. And while there are great incentives in Texas to do that, then, for these new data centers that they're talking about building in Texas, that growth may be impaired due to the lack of clean water and reliable energy. So this is something that really strikes home at the local level here, that why we need to do these bond deals. And Tom, Maybe they're loans. Maybe it doesn't have to, maybe it's a loan, maybe it's a bond deal, maybe it's a taxable. But my point is, it's all hands on deck. The challenge is enormous. And we need to be thinking about the future, Tom, together as our all-star generalist about how do we meet the challenges going forward, Tom. I would love to do another podcast at some point, maybe like a year from now, where I'd be able to talk to you about what you think is going to be needed to make this infrastructure financing happen there in Texas and the United States.
We definitely should do that. And that I was going to ask you one more question. I wanted to set the stage for that question by saying, I am looking at the breakdown of that 3.7 trillion infrastructure funding gap. One of the largest portions of that is in the energy sector. And then the other, and this is the national, not just Texas. And then one of the other largest numbers or largest portions of that funding gap is for wastewater and stormwater, right? And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you think it's going to take to close or to close and minimize that 3.7 trillion infrastructure funding gap, not just for those two categories, but for all the categories, but those two categories specifically, because those are two that we were just talking about where Texas is concerned.
Tom, America needs to go back to work. I think that's one of the big challenges that this administration faces, is how they get America back to work. We face this huge difficulty to the COVID crisis. We had the experiment with basically state-sponsored capitalism to reinflate our economy, which overheated. And now we have a situation where we've got to get the train back on the tracks and get it moving in an efficient and fair way in our economy. And I think that challenge is something that, as I said, infrastructure is the road ahead. And how we bridge the gaps in the funding is through the financing in the municipal bond market. There's some significant challenges to America's future without tax exempt for municipal bonds. And that's what I think, Tom, is key for people to understand. It's not just a local issue. I mean, we have to act locally, but to paraphrase, it's really a worldwide or global issue for us that we're challenging the world to sit there and transform the way we work across borders with the tariffs and benefit the American worker. And sometimes it may be at the expense of the American consumer, though. So that's a challenge, Tom.
But protecting the tax exemption is going to be key from what you're saying.
Absolutely. Without it, I don't know how it's going to happen, Tom. We'll be significantly hamstrung.
Well, Terry, thank you very much for joining us today and going through these big picture details. I look forward to having you back and we can talk about some more specifics. That'd be great. Thank you very much for joining us today, Terry.
Thank you, Tom. As always, a real pleasure to work with you and Hilltop.
And thank you, everyone, for joining the Hilltop Talks podcast today. For those interested, you can also see the recent Hilltop Securities economic and municipal commentary and listen to our podcasts by going to hilltopsecurities.com/commentary. And you can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thanks again, everyone. We look forward to bringing you more color in the future related to topics that intersect the world of politics, finance, and U.S. public finance. This has been Tom Kozlik from Hilltop Securities.